All right. Again, happy to answer more questions at the end, but today we're trying to do all the content upfront relatively fast and then have lots of time for a discussion on our call. So yeah, happy to take more questions if we've got them. I am going to go ahead and do an overview of the PIT methodology for 2024. This is a high-level overview. I am not a data specialist. Part of the reason that it's going to be me presenting today instead of Simtech is so that we can keep it nice and high level, because I don't even know the weeds to get into on what the details are on the data. Jackie and the rest of the Simtech team will help and really dig in as you all have questions after this overview. But we're trying something different today, so I appreciate your patience with that. Okay, so a point-in-time methodology. Ideally, in a perfect world, we would observe everyone and we would survey everyone. We would know all the people and where they are and how to get to them, and we would have a conversation and do a survey with every single person actively experiencing homelessness on the day of the count. Believe it or not, there are communities that attempt to do this, and that's called a full census methodology. But full census methodology has a lot of limitations and is not normally realistic. Even in the best case scenario, people will have a right to refuse to talk to you and may not take the survey. This kind of methodology also requires a large amount of volunteers compared to the number of people you anticipate in your homeless population. And large areas like Alameda with diverse different types of regions with rural, suburban, and city, there's a high variance in the types of need for what kind of volunteers you're going to send out and how that gets done. It's a little bit less practical in a large community like ours. So how we dealt with that in 2022 was we followed a methodology of observation and sampling. And that method focused on a complete observational count. So we would see and note everyone that was actively experiencing homelessness across the community. And then we would follow that up with a smaller sample, like a 10% sample who receive a complete survey and get a conversation. And that conversation is then extrapolated broadly across everyone who is noted and observed. In the new methodology for 2024, it's similar to that, but it has some key differences. The new methodology is called geographic sampling and enumeration, and it focuses on completing as many full surveys as possible. And it does that by using known locations to strategically target which areas need to get how many volunteers, so that we're sending our volunteer resources to where we know folks are definitely experiencing homelessness. And it limits the use of extrapolated data to areas where we don't expect to find people who are experiencing homelessness, so that as few of those areas as possible are getting the estimates applied to them. And when they do apply the estimates, it's using nearby census tracts, so that the estimates are a little bit more accurate than perhaps a general application across all observations based on a smaller sample. So one way to think about this is just visually, 2022 versus 2024. If for 10 people who were observed in 2022, one of them was surveyed and the other 9 received some extrapolated data about what we think is happening to them. So in the picture, we have a little Black person as actually spoken to and got a full survey. And then the little blue people, all those people were seen and noted as observed, but the survey was not done. And that was the plan up front. In the 2024 method, If we see someone, we are going to attempt to survey them. And we're expecting the majority of the people to say yes. A few people may say no or be unable to be contacted because they're asleep inside their tent and won't come out. Those people will get some extrapolated data based on the other 9 that we did get to talk to. So it's a much smaller number of people who are affected by statistical extrapolations and assumptions. The core elements of success for this to make that method work is having a really good volunteer recruitment. So we have a lot of people to get the coverage we need for the in-depth survey we need, and to have really high quality known location data so that we're sending people to the right places and we're not making assumptions about where we don't think anybody exists. We need to have really solid information about where we think people are and where we think people are not. Using those 2 things together is how we know how accurate this method is. So if we have more volunteers, we can say the survey was more accurate. If we have better known location data, we can say the survey was more accurate, or at least how accurately we were able to observe and survey. I'm going to do another example of this. But just before we get there, the way that we use the known location to send out volunteers, we use this terminology of high probability areas and low probability areas. And we're going to send volunteers to the high probability areas and fewer to the low probability. And as we're setting it, a high probability area has at least 1 known location reported. At least 1 person is known to be experiencing homelessness in that census tract, according to all the preliminary research that we're doing now. And volunteers will be sent there and they will be asked to attempt to survey anyone they observe. Those who refuse will get observation-only data. The low probability areas have no reports of anyone experiencing homelessness in advance during this preliminary phase. For those, we're going to take a random sample and we're going to send volunteers to those random areas and do a full survey in the random areas. And we'll use that information to extrapolate across the rest of the low probability. So here's the example. In this picture, the first 2 rows, it's about 10 people, are where we're saying that's a high probability area. Somebody like an outreach worker or a volunteer who registered dropped a pin in that box and said, yes, somebody's there. Volunteers will be sent to that area. In the blue section of the last 3 rows, there's people experiencing homelessness there, but nobody reported them. So that area was marked as a low probability area. So I've got 3 random people on this picture that are existing in our 10-block community, but they didn't get a pin drop. So those are getting marked as low probability. What happens next? So I've marked in teal or bright green all those high probability tracks. A volunteer is being sent, and all the little black people are getting a full survey. 1 person in blue refused to talk to the surveyor, and they're getting observation-only data. For the next 3 rows, I've marked them in blue, and we're calling those low probability tracks. And we're taking a random sample of orange boxes, and volunteers are actively going there. And you can see kind of from the picture, 1 of those volunteers found someone. Of the 5 orange boxes, 1 person was observed and was surveyed with a full survey with a volunteer in front of them. 2 people are still in the blue. Their random low probability area didn't get selected, and so they didn't get a survey. Those are kind of ghost people. And we believe they're out there, we think they're out there, because we encountered 1 person of the 5 orange that we did survey. For this, The ideal situation would be to have 20% or more of our low probability areas marked as those orange boxes that we're getting a volunteer sent there to check it out. And that 20% or more is what makes us confident in our ability to guess at what's happening in the blue boxes. So when we come to the final count, what's going to happen is we're adding up all the teal areas of places that we actually visited and surveyed and completed a full survey with volunteers. That's real data. And we're going to add to that extrapolation on anybody who refused to survey in that area that we did visit with volunteers. For the orange areas, we're also using real data of exactly what was observed there and what the volunteers saw. And we're using that information to extrapolate across what was previously blue. And that's how we add our ghost people in. So now they're in gray. So we think they're there. We believe they're there. And that's how we get to our final count number. And just a quick note about the person in blue. I know that observation only tool was a core component of the 2022 method. 90% of the people got this observation only tool and then the application of data across it. In this model, it's a less impactful component of the methodology, but it's still there. We do have an observation only survey tool that comes from Simtech. Yes, it relies on volunteers to assign demographic information. Yes, we're planning to do training on that for volunteers on how that works. In the Simtech observation tool, the volunteer must note why the person was unable to be surveyed. And that's in there to give a thought to the volunteer, like, hey, did you knock? Did you attempt? Please note why the attempt was unsuccessful, right? So we're really trying to minimize the number of people who get observation only. There will be some discussion of the formula on how the number of people inside vehicles that don't answer the knock on the door are counted. I'm saving that for a later date, but I did just want to make a note that there's a plan for this, but also it's affecting a relatively small population compared to how it was before. And that's the high level overview. That's how we're getting this thing done. Questions? And I'm happy to go back to any pieces, and I'm sure Jackie can answer all your